It's really good. And not just really good for manual shooters, like it's really good for everyone now. What if you cut a couple cameras off the LG V40 and spruced up the auto and HDR modes? Well, you'd have the LG G8. Flashback to the LG V40. I was months ahead of DxO for my criticisms of the phone's auto performance. But I don't ignore the advanced modes in my reviews. A camera is more than just an automatic shutter button. Come on now. The main takeaway for the G8, we get most of the hardware improvements from the V40, but with significant polish to software and processing. Since the V10, every generation of LG has improved auto modes while still lagging behind competitors. The G8 is a lot better. I almost filled a 128 gig card during my testing. This phone is so much fun to shoot on. Scene selection, processing, HDR, and we get that great standalone night mode. The feel is still very different than Apple or Google, and LG still doesn't seem to be using the same kind of stacked exposure trick in regular auto. But now there isn't a deal-breaking weak spot. This really is now one of the better all-rounders and still wins a handful of key victories for folks who do care, who want to control the images they create. But in full auto, scene detection is greatly improved when the camera decides to throw a flash or switch over to HDR. The AI mode is a lot less garish for social media filtered shots. We get top-notch panoramas from both the standard and wide cameras and full manual control of slow motion video. I've never seen that before on a phone. But getting back to HDR, improvements on the G8 look a lot closer to the stacked auto images on an iPhone. It's more about creating a more natural, high dynamic range than just boosting brightness and dumping tons of unicorn puke saturation. And we cannot write off how nice it is to have a dedicated night mode and how great night view is. It's close enough to a pixel. I doubt G8 owners will need to fall back on a Google camera port once they get a feel for how this phone shoots. Are you the kind of person who likes to make things with your phone? Do you want to dig deep into granular controls? Cool, that's all still here. But maybe you are the kind of person who just wants to stick to a shutter button snapshot. Also cool. You gotta love that LG was able to cater to more casual shooters without gutting the hardcore features content creators like. But the selfie camera, still super weak. I should probably point that out. You wanna see how I arrived at this conclusion? Of course you do. Why else would you be here? I show my work in my camera reviews. Buckle up, folks, we've got a lot of ground to cover, and I'm gonna move pretty quick. A camera is more than just the megapixels. Only 3 sensors on the G8 for me to test, thankfully. Makes my job a little easier than the V40. We lose the zoom sensor on the rear and the wider selfie shooter on the front. But over the LG G7 and matching the V40, we get the larger main camera sensor, improving low light performance and depth of field blur. That sensor proved capable on the V40, and we still get to pair that with a great ultra wide rear camera. The G8 covers a pretty decent spread, and it covers it well. Starting off with exposure and saturation, we're dealing with 2 different auto mode fields. We have a separate section on HDR, so I'll focus here on non-HDR shots, where LG still feels a little old-fashioned. I don't see any evidence that they've moved to a multiple exposure or best shot auto. There's a telltale watercolor